Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for our Beef Brunch Educational Series webinar. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping notes and then I'll introduce our speaker for today. So we will have your microphones muted. We're going to ask that you keep those muted throughout the webinar. If you're joining us online through the Teams app or link, we do have a Q&A box that you can enter your questions into at any time during the presentation. So again, there's a Q&A box that you can click on and enter your questions there at any point in time throughout the presentation. If you have called in, you can text your questions to me. My number is 512-818-5476. Again, if you've called in and you're listening on your phone, you can text questions to me throughout the webinar. That number is 512-818-5476. In the interest of time, we are going to wait and answer your questions at the end of the presentation. So I'm excited today. We have Mr. Andrew Granger. He's an extension agent, housed primarily out of Vermillion Parish, but also does cattle work in both Acadia and St. Mary parishes as well. And Andrew's going to be talking about winter supplementation alternatives. And we plan these webinars out in advance, but I think it's always important this time of year, but I feel like it's even more important this year with the cost of feed and fertilizer and ryegrass seed. Just everything has gone up. So Andrew, thank you for your time this morning, and you can start whenever you're ready.
Well, good morning, Ashley, and good morning, Beef Brunch crew. If we were live, I'd make you some beef griots and serve it over grits for you and have a real brunch. But since we're doing it this way, you'll have to take a rain check on that. But if you want to come down to Vermillion Parish for a brunch, let me know and we'll plan something out. We're going to talk about winter supplementation. There are some alternatives out there, and like Ashley said, feed prices are sky high right now. Corn's up and it's affecting our prices. Hopefully we get this corn situation under control. We have a very good ability to produce more corn if we need to, and I'm sure some farmers who grow corn are going to move that way and maybe change these market conditions for us. Last time we saw high price corn, $7 corn, all of our feeds went up and they have never come down. So it is an important thing. Winter supplementation accounts for a huge part of our costs, and so it's good to make good decisions. I'm having trouble moving my slides here. Oh, goodness.
Did you click back on that screen?
Hold on, let's see here. I can't seem to move the slides.
It looks like it froze completely. It was going a while ago.
Yeah. Let's see if I can get out of it. Oh, that didn't do good.
You're all right. You should be able to go back and share it again.
All right, now we got something. Good. I think
so we can see it go up because you're in presentation mode. I'm trying to remember. Jason, I see you on here.
Do y'all see it?
Yeah, but the screen's small. Jason, do you remember how to get him out of that mode, full screen?
It's under display settings up here at the top.
Duplicate slideshow is what you want? Or swap presenter?
Swap presentation view and slideshow.
How about now? It's better?
No, it hasn't gone through yet. Try it one more time. We'll just go with it like this. They'll be able to see your notes, but other than that, it's not bad. We can see your slides.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit today about winter supplementation. As I said, we'll cover hay testing. That's critical. If you're going to make the right choices and minimize costs, then test your hay. It may end up you need to get it right. We'll go over some cow requirements, brood cow requirements mostly, but certainly we'll look at that as well. You need to know what the cow needs, what goals you're having. You know, if your cows are thin or whatnot. Things kind of change, but you got to review that and know what that is. We'll talk about the choices you have. We'll talk about 3 different choices that are out there for most people to get a hold of. We'll compare those choices, and then we'll talk a little bit about making the proper choice to be more profitable. So you want to get it right. You want to get your supplementation right and as accurate as possible. The first thing you need to do that is to test your hay. Testing your hay by batches, taking good random samples. Usually we recommend about 10 bales per sample. We're taking hay from 10 different bales from a cutting. You need to try and keep your cuttings separate if you can. Know which cutting is where, and that way you can kind of make some adjustments over time. If you've got 3 different cuttings, and of course down here this year we're only going to get maybe 1 or 2 cuttings at the most, but figure out where that hay is in your barns or where your storage is, and keep those cuttings separate. Sample those cuttings separately, and then you can kind of make a list of what you have. You want to match your supplements to the needs based upon the hay quality and what your cattle need. You can match, feed the right amount of whatever supplement you decide to choose. Our forage lab has reopened. The website that you can get applications from on that website. Forms to fill out to complete your hay test. Certainly you want to be aware of what requirements your cattle have. Check that in various sources, but basically a dry mature cow, this is in the last third of her gestation, of her pregnancy, is going to require about 12 pounds of TDN a day and about 2 pounds of crude protein a day. And that's basically what she needs. That equates to about a 53% TDN hay, feed or ration, and about 8% crude protein in the total ration. And so that's what you're going to have to need. Now, hay alone can do that. Some of you make hays that match this or even better. If that's the case, if you have enough of that hay, then you really don't need any supplementation. You don't have to put out a tub or whatever. You can put out just loose minerals if you got hay that is of this quality, and you can get through the winter with cows with just hay. So that is a possibility, but in most cases, something is deficient in our hay that we need to supplement, and that's when we need to decide what supplement to use. For instance, a lactating cow is going to require about 13 pounds of TDN and 2.5 pounds of protein per day. So if you have cows that are nursing calves this winter, then you're going to have to provide either some ryegrass or something to meet that kind of need, because most of our hays are not going to produce that kind of nutrition. The other thing to consider is you need to condition score your cows and what condition they're in. Thin cows need more nutrients for weight gain, and so if you've got some bunch of 4s like that's pictured there in your herd, then you might want to separate those out and feed those a little bit more to make sure you're getting that weight gain that you require before calving. So it's a good practice to, at weaning time, this time of year, condition score your cows and make sure that you're going to make plans for our thinner cows. If all your cows are in good shape, then we can use those figures we just talked about. Those requirements are for maintenance only, to maintain that weight. So that's the kind of thing you're going to need. So we have a lot of choices out there, different types of products, come in different packaging. They have advantages and disadvantages of each, but basically we're going to talk about tubs today. Very, very popular because of their convenience. We'll talk about cubes, and we'll talk about byproduct feeds. We're going to talk a little bit about the economics of those, of each one, and compare those economics the convenience of them, and then the price per pound of the most limiting nutrient. Those are the kinds of things you need to look at in your choices. Tubs they come in all shapes and sizes. They have 500-pound blocks. I would include the blocks, characterize those the same as a tub. You have a 250-pound. The variation in protein is there. There's variation, they could be 32% protein or crude protein, or they could be 25% crude protein. And so it gets kind of what's the best tub, So there's all different kinds of products. Cubes have been very, very high this year and have gone up. Prices around here, I don't know about you, but for a good quality cube, it's over $500 a ton. That's the kind of prices I was looking at just recently. On the other hand, byproduct feeds, and there are quite a few different kinds. They are probably your cheapest way to go. They've got some issues. You got to buy, we'll talk about those issues with all three of those choices. But if you're looking for an inexpensive, the most inexpensive route, then byproduct feeds would be considered. Things like corn gluten pellets, distillers dried grains, all of those are available. You may be in an area where you can get a whole cottonseed. That would be a good byproduct feed. Down here, we used to have an unlimited supply, it seemed, of rice bran. That has kind of gone away. We've closed several of our mills down here and consolidated those, and so it's not nearly as available as it once was, but rice bran would be considered a byproduct feed and can be very, very useful. Again, tubs are going to probably be your most expensive thing, but you're paying for some convenience. Cubes are intermediate, and then byproduct feeds are probably going to be your cheapest source. Again, when you do compare these things, you want to compare them based upon the price per pound of the most limiting nutrient. You look at your hay sample, you get it tested. 6% crude protein hay is going to need some help. And if your TDN analysis is closer to which one is closer to meeting the needs, that's the way you price first. If you're closer to meeting the needs for protein in your hay, then you would do a price per pound of TDN. If your TDN is close to right, which is most often the case, the protein is usually more limiting than the TDN. Well, if you've got a 6% crude protein hay with a 52% TDN, then protein is the most limiting nutrient. And so you would price that, and we'll show you how to do that. We'll price that feed based upon that most limiting nutrient. So let's look at tubs. Like I said, there are various different kinds, again, different levels of nutrients in them. The thing that is advantageous to all of these tubs is that they're very convenient. You go and you put them out. You need to make sure you put enough of them out. Probably a couple of tubs per 25 head would probably work. So if you're running 100 cows, you're gonna need quite a few tubs at a time to be able to make sure that most of those cows are getting to lick on them. So they do have most of it's very convenient. You don't have to. They limits the amount of labor you have because you don't have to go out every day. You should go out often to check your cows, especially during the winter and especially when you get closer to calving. But you don't have to go out every day, as opposed to some of the other choices that you'll have. They're easy to store. They stack up. I don't like them because they're heavy. I got to get my tractor out every time I have to move a tub around, but especially when they're full. But they do store very easily. They stack up. It won't take up much room. You don't need any feed troughs with tubs. Some of the other choices, you're going to have a battery of troughs, especially, you need enough troughs to space your cows out so that you can make sure that even the more timid cows have a space to eat. So you're going to need several troughs for that, but in this case, for tubs, you don't need troughs. It is self-limiting. You get, some of them claim a pound per head per day, 2 pounds per head per day. That's all they can eat, and it's basically limited by its farm. In other words, a cow can't stand there and lick long enough to eat a whole lot more. And so That's how they're limited. It's the farm that they're in. You don't have to use salt or lime. I've heard people using lime to limit feed intake on cattle. That's not necessary with these tubs. They're self-limiting. Again, you have less labor. You put them out. You don't have to go every day and put out feed and that kind of thing. So you limit your labor. They also include minerals, and so most cases they're going to supplement your mineral intake on your cows as well. So you may be more assured of them getting the proper amounts of mineral with the tub. You put out loose minerals. Some cows don't eat it at all, and that can be the case on a tub as well. But in most cases, the cows will go to eat the tub because of its sweet taste. But minerals, put out loose minerals. Some cows are going to eat them, and some cows aren't. Sometimes there's some minerals that overeat the mineral, and if you keep it in front of them all the time, you could spend a lot of money on minerals. In other cases down here, we have salty water. Sometimes our cows are drinking salty water. It's water that they crave. It's salt that they crave in a mineral. It's what they like in a mineral, what attracts them to the mineral in most cases. And so you have to monitor your mineral intake pretty closely when you put it out loose minerals. The case on these tubs it's not like that. And then it also helps with grazing management. By moving your tubs around from place to place, you intensify the grazing in those areas. You congregate your cows in those areas. And so if you don't have a rotational grazing system, you can kind of manage some grazing just with the use of tubs. There are also some disadvantages. Tub disadvantage. One of the disadvantages is that they are self-limiting. So because they disregard animal requirements. If you've got some cows with calves out there and they can only eat 1 pound a day or 2 pounds a day or 3 pounds a day, that may not be enough, depending upon your hay quality. That may not be enough to sustain a lactating cow, whereas the dry cows are getting plenty. So it disregards the animal requirements. It allows for 2 pounds per head per day, and that's all they're going to get. It works good with all your cows are dry, and your hay's fairly good quality. Then you're fine. But if you've got some cows that are out there that need more, that they're in a different stage of lactation, then it may not work quite as well. It also disregards condition score. If you're trying to put weight on cows, again, it's self-limiting, and they can only eat so much of it. And so if you've got some thin cows that you're trying to put weight on, then tubs are probably not a good choice. It reduces your contact with your cattle. You don't get to see your cat. Chances are, because the feed's out there, you're less likely to go out and visit your cattle. Also, they're not congregated. When you feed by hand, it pulls all those cows to those troughs, and they're easy to check and see which ones are getting close. If you've got some heifers out there mixed with your cows, you can see that they're getting close, and you can probably move those into an area that you can manage them a little bit closer. On the other hand, with these tubs, they're not going to be there to check. So it really limits the producer contact with their cattle. The costs are, and we'll look at that a little bit later, the cost per unit of nutrient is very high, either for TDN or for protein with a tub. They're astronomical. Also, most of these tubs have some non-protein nitrogen in the form of urea. And having urea is not a bad thing. We're lucky. We have this amazing critter that can use free nitrogen or ammonia and make protein with it because of the microbes in their rumen. And that's a true advantage. But also you have to realize that urea is not as effective. It's not as efficient as true protein. And so it could be considered a disadvantage. But you need to take that into account when you're looking at the advantages and disadvantages of tubs. You usually get some non-protein nitrogen in urea, and you need to make adjustments in your evaluation of those tubs based upon that. The second choice we want to talk about is cubes. you know, they do allow for producer contact. If you're putting out cubes every day or every other day, you can every other day feed dry cows in particular and do a good job. Now you need to not feed, if you figure you need 3 pounds per head per day and you're feeding every other day, then you need to put 6 pounds out for the 2 days if you're going to achieve what you're trying to achieve. But you can, skip a day in between and just do every other day, and that seems to, most of the research shows that it works okay. It's easy to handle a sack. If you got, 30 cows or whatever, you put a couple of sacks of cubes on the back of a four-wheeler and you ride to the troughs, and all the cows are there for you to look at, and you dump one bag or half a bag in each of the 4 troughs or whatever it is, and so it's easy to handle sacks. It's just the problem with it is as we'll see, it's kind of expensive, especially these days and age. These days and ages. You also can vary the amounts you feed based upon the needs of the cattle. In other words, if you've got a group of cows that are extra thin and you want them to gain weight, you can put those separate and feed them 4 pounds of cubes per head per day, or 5 pounds of cubes per head per day, and get some weight back on them. Can't do that with a tub. So it allows you to match your feed amounts to the needs of the cattle. It also has minerals in it, and so it reduces the need to have mineral out while you're feeding these cubes. In general, we want minerals out all the time, but in this case, you can get some mineral nutrition from the cubes. They does allow for mechanized feeding. They make feeders that you can ride along. If you do have drier ground than we have down here, we have some levees we could probably do it on, but if you've got some gravel roads or some well-drained areas where you can feed your cattle, then you can drop those cubes right on the ground with these they fit in the back of a pickup truck. You load them up with cubes and they drop out all along the road. The cattle can come up, and in that case, you don't really need troughs, and so that can be done with these cubes. They're big enough, the cattle can pick them up, and they won't waste a whole lot of them by dumping them on the ground somewhere, as long as that ground is dry. Like everything, it's got advantages and disadvantages. Cubes certainly have some disadvantages. They are labor intensive. At least you're going to be going out every other day. If you've got 100 head of cattle, it takes you some time to get the cubes out. So it is labor intensive. Maybe not quite as labor intensive as byproduct feeds, but it's more so than tubs. Troughs are generally needed. Cost of feed is so high. I just talked about mechanized feeding and dumping them on the ground, but if I never would do that because I'm too worried about wasting money, and so most people are going to want to have some troughs out even for those large size cubes. The cost is an issue, especially this year. Like I said, I was priced over $500 a ton for cubes. That's significant. And certainly that's something we need to look at if we're going to maintain our profitability. Some cubes do have urea in them. And again, you have to take that into account when you're evaluating or comparing cubes, or 2 different kinds of cubes, or cubes to tubs, or cubes to byproduct feeds. So what about byproduct feeds? There's a bunch of them out there. Their advantages are that they're generally going to be cheaper to use than any other source of supplementation. Just like on cubes, you can change the amount you're feeding to meet the needs of the cattle that you're trying to accomplish something with. Again, thin cows or cows that are lactating, you put those separate and change the amounts of feed you're giving. It allows, just like cubes, you have to pretty much hand feed these byproducts. You don't have to. If you have a self feeder and you use salt or some mineral, most of these byproduct feeds are not really that dangerous as far as acidosis is concerned. because they don't. Most of them are resulting from the removal of starch from corn, and so they're not dangerous from that point. But if you get cows starting to eat 8-10 pounds a day, they may not get acidosis, or they may not, founder, but you don't want them eating 8 pounds a day because they don't need 8 pounds a day, so it costs you too much. So if you do use a self-feeder, you need to find some kind of way to limit that, either with salt. If you have wooden feeders, you can use salt. If you want them to consume 2 pounds of feed per day, then you put 2 pounds, you mix 2 pounds of feed with 1 pound of salt, and usually you want, at 1 pound of salt, cattle will quit eating once they get about an intake of 1 pound of salt. And so 1 pound of salt with 2 pounds of feed will give you 2 pounds of feed intake. 1 pound of salt with 3 pounds of feed will get you 3 pounds of feed intake. So depending on what you want to accomplish, you can do that. And like I've never used it or really figured out exactly the ratio, and that might be a good question to look up or talk to some of the other animal scientists on the video this morning. But you can use lime, ag lime, to limit intake. So you've got some flexibility with these products as far as amounts that you feed, ways to store it, different types of things. The picture on the slide is, speaking of storage, is what you see in a lot of places in Texas and in Kansas and even Mississippi. They have what's called their commodity sheds. We don't see them a lot, at least not around here in South Louisiana, but it's something that we probably need to look at, especially if you're trying to raise a large number of cattle. If you only got 25 head, you can probably buy a self-feeder and scoop out the feed as you need it. But if you're feeding large numbers of cattle, you're going to want one of these sheds and feed with a front end loader or whatnot from your tractor, or it's just going to take you too long. You can't do it by bucket. The density, these products are usually very nutrient dense. They're high in protein in most cases, high in fat in some cases. So they've got energy. They're very digestible, and so they're very dense, and they provide you don't need to use a lot of them. Depending on your hay quality, you don't have to feed a lot of these products to get what you want done. They're also in most cases complementary to forage. Like I said, we'll talk about what some of the ones are, but like corn gluten is a byproduct of the corn starch industry. So they're taking the corn starch out. Well, starch is what's dangerous and non-complementary to our forage systems. And so because they are mostly a very digestible fiber, a highly digestible fiber that's in them, and they get their energy, or it's because of a fat content in its energy, you don't get the problems with trying to feed a starchy like you would with cubes. Cubes have some starch in them. They're much more dangerous to get too much intake than these byproduct feeds are. So they tend to complement our forage systems because of where they're getting their energy from. It's mostly from a digestible fiber or a fat, and not from starch. What about the disadvantages? Well, it's very labor intensive. You have to figure out some kind of way to measure out there. They don't come in 50-pound sacks, so you have to measure out the amounts of feed you have every day. If you're using a front end loader to put it out with your tractor, then you need to get a good weight. What this product weighs, what a full bucket weighs of the various products. Availability can be a problem. Last year during the pandemic, it was hard to find corn gluten or distillers dry grains. That's what we try to get around here mostly. Our rice bran, most of those things were not as available as normal. So availability can be a problem. You have to buy large amounts. If you're going to make it work, you need to either get with your neighbors are you going to need a truckload for? You're going to need 23 tons of feed. That's how it comes. It comes in a 18-wheeler truck, and so it's usually somewhere between, like I said, 22 to 25 tons on a truck. Storage is an issue as well. You know, you can't let it get in the rain or whatever, and so you have to find some kind of way to store it. Either in a commodity shed or a barn. If you got an old barn with a good solid dirt floor, that'll work. It's probably best to have a concrete floor because you're going to be more efficient in scooping it up, but it can work on a dirt floor, but it needs to be kind of a firm dirt floor. You're going to have troughs. If you're not self-feeding, and a lot of our producers will load these byproducts into their self-feeder and then scoop them out, but some of them will also try to limit feed them in these self-feeders. If you don't have that, you're going to need troughs. And usually when I talk about troughs, I'm going to want a trough for every 7 or 8 cows, and that will allow for the more timid cows to be able to eat. You know, there's always going to be some bosses around the troughs, and they're not going to let the other cows eat. And you know, some of these boss cows will move from trough to trough, pushing cattle around. But if you've got enough troughs spaced out then you can certainly do a decent job with making sure all the cattle get some feed. There are no minerals, and in fact, there are not going to be any minerals in these feeds. And in fact, in some cases, they're high in a mineral, can cause some issues with binding some of these minerals up. And so you have to be aware of what you're feeding and what the mineral status is. But you do need to have, because you're feeding these feeds, most of them are very high in phosphorus. So you're going to want to have a high cal mineral available. You know, some of our producers will mix the mineral with the feed. That assures a certain amount per head per day, and you know that they're getting it. But at least have some loose minerals out and make sure those minerals are high in calcium as compared to phosphorus. And then you're going to have some knowledge. Like I said, you need to know what the mineral status is. What is the nutrient value of these different byproducts, and how do they match the cattle that you're trying to feed. It increases the amount of knowledge that you need if you're going to go with a byproduct feed. It's not that easy. It's not as easy as the other things that you just put out. Know that some nutritionist has figured it out for you. So what is the best buy? You know, I think that's the big question. You know, like I said, 70% of our 60 to 70% of our total cost is in not necessarily winter feeding, but in nutrition of the cattle, and a huge part of that is winter supplementation. I hope you get ryegrass up, and you don't need much of this, but if you do like some of our guys, because it's so wet down here, they don't grow a whole lot of ryegrass. It makes up a huge part of their total cost is their hay and their supplementation. So like I said earlier, if you're going to really determine which feed's better as far as cost is concerned, you need to price them based on the cost per pound of nutrient. And you want to use the nutrient that is most limiting in the hay. And that's why we say to do it right, you kind of got to test your hay. Bermuda grass, you have to assume that you have a certain quality hay, and probably you want to assume on the low side, and so it's not the way to get it as accurate as possible, but it is a way to make some assumptions. But if not, you need to test your hay. Bermuda grass hay test, let's say you have a Bermuda grass hay and it tests 6.5% crude protein and 54% TDN. We went over the requirements, the dry cow requirements, dry late gestation requirements, and basically that's what you want to look at. You don't want to use the early gestation cows, because when are if you're calving in the spring, if you're starting to calve in February and you don't start to feed until middle of November, well, she's already in the last third of her pregnancy. So this is the one we have to look at. Dry cow requirements, 2 pounds of protein per day and 12 pounds of TDN per day. Well, if we look at that Bermuda grass hay and do the math, and assume that the cows are going to eat 25 pounds of dry matter a day. If you do the math, it comes this hay would supply 1.6 pounds of protein per day. So And then if you look at the TDN, you're above the requirement. If you have a 54% hay, 54% TDN hay, you're actually already above the requirement for TDN. So the most limiting nutrient in this case is protein. We need more protein to get to that 2 pounds of protein per head per day. So price per pound of protein, tubs or cubes? Well, price some tubs here locally. They're asking about $104. This is the, I don't want to say that, you know, say that the PVM tubs are best, but this is on a PVM tub. It's $104 for 225 pounds. And that tub has 28% crude protein in it, but 7% is urea, non-protein nitrogen. We usually make an assumption that only half of the urea is actually used. So 21% from a natural source plus half of the percentage from the urea, which was 7, so that comes out to 3.5 is half of it. So we basically have 24.5% of usable crude protein or available crude protein. What happens in the rumen is cattle have the bacteria, the microbes in the rumen have what's called urease. It can split a urea atom molecule into 2 ammonia molecules. And so because it can do that, you have free ammonia in the rumen. Well, the rumen is an excellent absorption organ. It absorbs things rapidly. So some of that urea is going to be grabbed by the microbes, but some of that urea is going to escape into the blood supply. And it's also why we need to be careful about how much urea we feed. We have this ability to take, like I said, molecular nitrogen and turn it into protein. These microbes can do that. That's an amazing thing. It helps us. We need to try to use some urea, but if we use too much, we can also poison the cattle. So again, we're going to do the math. This tub weighed 225 pounds. It has 24.5% usable crude protein. So we multiply the 225 by 0.245, and that equals 55 pounds of protein in a 225 pound tub. Again, we want to figure out a price per pound of crude protein. So we divide, the price is $104, pounds are 55. Do the math and it costs you about $1.89 per pound of protein in this tub. And then now we want to compare it to cubes. Cubes or tubs is our question here. Well, cubes, I was quoted a price of $518 per ton. That's crazy high. And this particular cube was 20% all natural, and so we assume efficiency is normal to a crude protein source. So again, we do the math. It's $518 per ton, so we want to figure out how many pounds of protein in a ton of these cubes. Multiply 2,000, that's a ton, times 20% or 0.20, and you come out with 400 pounds of protein in a ton of this feed. We want to figure out a price per pound of protein, so $518 divided by 400 pounds of protein, and it comes out to $1.29 per pound of protein. So in this case, the better buy, and in most cases, better buy is not going to be the tubs. You're paying for convenience, you're paying for all sorts of other advantages, but it's not cost. And if we're looking to cut costs, then tubs are not usually the way to go. So tubs are going to be $1.89 per pound of crude protein, cubes $1.29. Cubes are the better buy. So again, about 70% of our cow costs are nutrition costs. Small cuts in our winter supplementation or nutrition program can certainly turn losses into profits. We could go on and do some of those other ones. I'll try to go back here and look at those byproduct feeds again. You know, I was quoted a price of $2.80 for just corn gluten pellets. Again, that's going to be way cheaper than cubes. They're similar as far as protein content to a cube, but they're going to be half price. So you're saving a bunch of money there. I was quoted a price of over $300, like $315 for distillers dry grades. Again, that's a little bit higher. You got a little bit higher quality. You got a little bit higher level of protein in our distillers dry grades than we do in corn gluten. So it's probably not quite worth the difference in price, but again, it's probably still a better buy than either cubes or tubs. And then the other source that you might have is cottonseed, whole cottonseed. Very good feed as far as it's got a high fat content, and that's kind of overlooked in many cases. You don't want to feed more than about 7% fat in a cattle diet, but some fat in the diet tends to help with reproduction. And for years we've used rice bran. It's 13% crude protein, 13% fat, 13% fiber. You have to feed a little bit more of it if you're trying to supplement protein, low protein hays, but it's been so cheap that it's been worthwhile. The high fat contents that should be concerned. You should be concerned about the high fat contents in some of these byproducts because you don't want a total more than 7% in the total ration of fat, or you can cause some issues. I've never seen founder on any of these products except for rice bran, and it wasn't the starch that was causing issues. It was the cattle were eating too much and getting too much fat in their diet. So in summary, you need to know the nutrient requirements of the cattle you're trying to feed, and you also need to know what quality your hay is. Do that by hay testing. There are many available alternatives out there. We talked about tubs and cubes and byproduct feeds. There could be some others out there as well. You know, if you're making baleage and you're making high quality baleage in the spring with ryegrass, that could be your supplement to your dry hay. So that would be certainly a good choice. But there are some alternatives out there. If you got some questions about those, we'd certainly be happy to answer them. All of these products, different choices have some advantages and disadvantages. You have to look at what you need, what you're capable of. You know, what can you do, and decide which product is most advantageous for your program. You know, you need to know what is possible, and I hope I covered some of that to tell you what is possible this morning. And then you need to compare costs, and if you need some help on comparing cost per nutrient, give us a call and we'll certainly help you that. But that's the way to price these winter supplementations. And that'll do it for me this morning. Let me know what if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So a reminder that you can still get your questions in if you are online with us through the app or the website. You can get those into the Q&A box. If you've called in, you can text those to me. My number is 512-818-5476. So we're going to give it just a few minutes if y'all want to get some questions in for Andrew to answer. While we're doing that, I'm going to take over the screen for a second. So after each webinar, we do ask that you please take just 2 to 3 minutes to complete a survey for us. If you're watching it live, the way to do that, you can open your camera on your phone and you can view this QR code on the right. At the top of the phone, you will see a banner pop up. You can click on that. It'll go into your web browser and you can answer the survey. Again, it doesn't take 3 minutes to do this. It does really help us in moving forward with our Beef Brunch series. If you're watching the recording of this or listening to it on the podcast, I always have the link to the survey in the video and podcast descriptions, so you can do that as well. And I will say we are looking to start planning our webinars for next year. And so there is a question box at the end of the surveys that you can send topic requests or questions into. If you're watching the recording of this or again listening to it, if you have questions for Andrew, you can get those sent in to me. All my contact information is always there for the Beef Brunch, and I can relay those to Andrew and have him get with you. So I'm sure most of you are probably aware, but just our website, lsuagcenter.com/beef brunch. We do record these and they go onto that website as well as our YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and do LSU Ag Center -livestock, you can find all of those as well as other videos on there too. So if y'all give me just a second, let me check the Q&A box again. I don't see anything, Andrew. It looks like you're getting off easy this go around. So
Right.
Thank you again for.
Let me know if I can be more help, and I hope everybody has a good ryegrass year, because some of us need it.
Yes, us too. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and thank all of y'all for joining us.